Welcome to Our Canada, Our Future. I'm Aaron Woodrick. On today's show, we're going to be talking about a cultural phenomenon that's taking on increasing prominence these days, something called critical race theory. And to do that, I'm pleased to be joined today by Jamil Jivani, president of the Canada Strong and Free Network, and a senior fellow at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. Jamil, thanks so much for joining me today.
Yeah, great to be with you, Aaron.
I think maybe we should just start with the basics. A lot of people may have heard this term, critical race theory or CRT, but maybe you can sort of give us the elevator pitch version of what exactly is critical race theory.
Yeah, I think a lot of Canadians might recognize critical race theory from American news and American culture wars. It did start as an American idea in Columbia University's law school, in New York University Law School. And it began as a way of acknowledging that different laws and policies might impact different communities and different individuals in unique ways because of their history, because of their race, because of their identity, which is a pretty fair idea, right? It started off as a fair point, I think, and that's why it wasn't very controversial when it began. But it has evolved outside of American law schools and now become a dominant governing ideology in institutions, in businesses, in different organizations, influencing how we think about law, how we think about policy, how we think about our identity, patriotism, nationality. And ultimately what it's turned into is not just a point that, hey, maybe racism could be relevant to this law or this policy. Now it's turned into an assurance, a guarantee that there must be racism everywhere. And it's asking us, if you don't see the racism, to look for it. And that's a real problem because what it's doing is essentially arguing that in a diverse, multicultural country like Canada, we cannot have race neutral laws and policies. Everything we do, everything we are as a country has a racial component to it, according to critical race theory. And that's why terminology has become so pervasive these days that reflects that ideology. Nowadays, when you hear a term like systemic racism or white privilege, sounds like normal, right? 5 years ago, it wasn't normal. And that's because critical race theory has grown so quickly.
Now, you've said a lot. I want to unpack some of it. I mean, your first point, of course, was that this sort of started in American universities and it's somehow escaped academia. What are some of the examples that Canadians might be familiar with? Are there any sort of prominent examples of where critical race theory has been in the news in Canada, just as an example of how it sort of spilled over here north of the border?
Absolutely. So one of the clearest examples that we could take a look at comes from our federal government, Global Affairs Canada. They've incorporated critical race theory in their training of government officials. So if you want a job now representing Canada in one of our embassies, working in the world of diplomacy on behalf of this country, you are now being forced to do training where they're telling you that ideas like timeliness, which this sounds crazy, sense of urgency, mathematics, like that these concepts are now white, that if you are a non-white person, it is somehow an offense to you to be told that these sorts of things are important. It's very racist thinking. And yet that is what critical race theory has done to some of our institutions. Another clear example, just earlier this year, almost every single member of the Ontario Provincial Parliament across all parties voted in favor of what was called Bill 67, which would have mandated the teaching and practice of critical race theory in Ontario public schools. So you can look these examples up and you'll see this ideology has grown very quickly, very fast in our side of the border.
Very interesting. And, I guess a question for people who aren't quite sure on the difference between critical race theory itself and sort of just general awareness of racial differences. What is the difference? What is distinct about critical race theory from the idea that we just need to be more aware of the fact that different things might impact people of different color differently?
Well, critical race theory, one, demands that there cannot be a law or policy in our country that does not have a racial component. And what that means in practice is that someone like me is being told, you're always going to be a victim. No matter how hard you try, no matter how much our country changes, you will always be oppressed. That's the difference.